Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. And today with me I have Jamie and Matt from Steamforge Games, and we are talking about Monster Hunter World.
Yeah.
Amongst other things.
And other things, and stuff. And it's been public at this point, right? We can talk about it.
Almost certainly. And if it's not, it is now.
Let's just say yes.
Cool. I'll throw it in the thumbnail and whatnot. But talking about Iceborne, right?
Yes.
Monster Hunter World Iceborne. So I have a bunch of questions. Before we dive into this, we're going to go into this kind of completely. We're going to figure out where the conversation takes us. But you can also head over to Crackle's channel, which I believe you have some additional Monster Hunter related content over there.
Yeah, we've spent a fun day with Jesse and Wes and playing through a bunch of Monster Hunter, chatting to them about a few cool little design things that we've been working on for Iceborne. Yes, had a great day.
Perfect. And we're going to dive into a bit of a conversation around, well, everything here. Monster Hunter, Iceborne, the things you've added, the changes, various... We'll just take the conversation where it goes. Past that, there'll be links down below to a variety of stuff. We will have a gameplay, probably Monster Hunter World at some point. If you didn't see, there's been one on the channel a long time ago, but we'll have some new in-person stuff. We'll have whatever things will be down here. There'll be a link to the crowdfunding campaign. You can check that out. A whole lot of links down below. But, with that said, Monster Hunter World's been delivering. Right, it's been showing up people's doors. I've seen people show up boxes. Is delivery mostly complete at this point?
I think so.
Should be completed by sort of mid to late April, I think.
Yes. And Iceborne is launching when?
It's going to launch on Kickstarter May 18th.
May 18th. Okay, and so just a high level pitch. I'll do the high level pitch of Monster Hunter, and then I'm going to ask you questions on Iceborne.
Sure. Monster
Hunter World, for those who don't know, is, well, first of all, it's based on the video game. If you're not familiar with that, they have an app too, right? They have like app games. Do they?
I think so.
They have mobile games. They have Switch games.
They have Switch games, yeah.
Monster Hunter is a franchise that's been around for ages.
Yeah.
In various forms.
I've played none of it. I've been tempted by all of it. I keep getting the Steam notifications when it goes on sale, and I keep thinking to myself, I'd rather be playing board games. But speaking of board games, we have Monster Hunter World, the board game, which is effectively a boss hunting game. A boss hunting game where you're going to be taking down a variety of these bosses as you go through. You can do single shot, I believe, but you can also do campaign mode.
Yep.
Yes. And you can be going through controlling your hunters, leveling up your gear, taking down these various monsters, and then getting the various remnants and remains from them and using them to forge new items and gear for your various heroes as you go through the quest. Each quest has, they have a quick version to jump through it, but otherwise you can go through a whole procedural journey kind of as you track the monster, engage with various things in the world, and take damage until eventually you're thrown into battle at some point, at which point you deal with the monster and hopefully don't die. And then rinse and repeat as you go through the campaign. That's basically very high level what this game is. As far as Monster Hunter World Iceborne, this is like the first start of all the questions and things. What's different? What's new? What's the same? What's different?
Oh, I'm going to let Jamie dive in with that one.
So, quite a few things. So the first thing, the most obvious thing, is that the roster of monsters, these are kind of like the rock stars of the show when it comes to Monster Hunter World, is actually more the monsters than the hunters.
Okay.
There's a completely different roster of monsters. So you got some brand new monsters that you've never seen before from World, and there are also some returning cast members from World that have like a slightly different version to them.
Okay.
So for example, you've got Pookie Pookie here that's in the Wildspire Wastes set in World. You've got Coral Pookie Pookie that's going to be coming in one of the sets in Iceborne, because they have some of the returning casts with slightly different flavour to them.
Gotcha.
Like that. You're going to have all same 14 hunter classes reappearing again, but they're going to have all the different weapon upgrades and armor upgrades that we have access to because they're fighting completely different monsters.
And Monster Hunter World has 14 classes, that's what it is? That's
It's four.
Okay.
So there's
So
four.
the base game had all 14 already?
Correct.
Gotcha.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So the same 14 weapons are reappearing.
To clarify, the base game means the original,
The
full
overall,
encompassing.
yeah.
I shouldn't say base game. Someone might buy the base game. I think it's 14. The encompassing content for Monster Hunter World has all 14.
Yeah. And then we've done a couple of changes, made a couple of changes to the game, sort of mechanically and thematically, to match the fact that Monster Hunter Iceborne has such a completely different feel to it than Monster Hunter World does. I mean, for starters, you're in a completely different biome. The environment is different.
Okay.
You have like deep snow terrain. You've got to work your way around. You're in the Hoarfrost Reach rather than in the ancient forest and Wildspire Waste.
And so this goes back to my own limited experience with Monster Hunter World so far. But Monster Hunter World so far has these beautiful looking maps with a few terrain effects here and there. Not a ton of terrain effects. Is that how much is that changing in Iceborne to reflect?
So in a couple of different ways. So one is there are going to be some terrain changes themselves. So the terrain nodes are going to be different. You'll have those deep snow nodes that come in and have an impactful, impact on the way you're going to be playing the game, or effect rather. And then you also have some elements of the fact that the very ground underneath you can be shifting around as it does in the video game. Sometimes you have just entire crevices that open up in the floor or glacial shifts.
Interesting.
We're going to be representing that through a bigger use of what we call event cards, which are, do you remember the red cards that we shuffle into the time deck sometimes? Yeah. So we didn't make a huge amount of use of those in World. It was kind of more focused on the gameplay with the hunters themselves and playing around with the monsters and hunting them and having fight with them. But in terms of Iceborne, we want to instead have a much closer link with the narrative to the gameplay.
Okay. Much more cinematic, isn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely. And one of the key ways we're going to be doing that is making a much bigger use of event cards. You've had something happen in the storyline, that's going to trigger an event card that's going to have a very impactful effect upon the gameplay and the story as well, and that's going to shuffle into the time deck. Sometimes you'll have multi-stage events that happen as well. Event that will trigger something else to happen later in the game, and that's going to include sort of your environmental impact as well as the kind of thing.
So if the ground is shifting underneath you, how does that manifest? Are there different board pieces? Are the hunters just moving around? Like, what's happening?
It's more to do with sort of how that'll impact in terms of positional play that's going on. It will impact other items of resources you can get hold of. It impact different sort of special moves you can use on the game board. It's more to do with a thematic impact than there's sort of big classic.
Gotcha.
Well, but from a design perspective, it's one of those really interesting mechanisms that's quite simple for us to implement.
Yeah.
But it opens up a huge amount of opportunity. So, you could have an event which is, like an ice shelf has just sheared away, and suddenly a whole part of the board is now unavailable to you.
Okay.
So it changes that game state. You can move the player characters around. You can move the monsters around. You can bring more things onto the board, which we'll talk about at some point in time. So it really is looking to sort of drive into that cinematic experience, so you feel like the story is unfolding as you play.
Okay. So that's one thing. So we got the train and things. We got those aspects. What else is new?
Yeah. So some other elements as well. So some bits that are not necessarily unique to Iceborne. So some elements of the sort of Monster Hunter sort of franchise and game that have been brought in as well. So mantles, for example, is a big part of things for video gamers that would recognise as additional equipment you can wear. We're going to be diving deeper into how the palicos work as well. Like in the original game, the palico miniatures were kind of mainly upgrades for your tokens that you can play with, and they were kind of functioned sort of like an equipment card, something there. But we're going to bring in the sort of the quite deep crafting element of the game into how the palicos operate.
I was just going to say, just for people who don't know, a mantle is like a one-use item. That is a bit like in effect, from a D&D perspective, it's like a potion or something.
Gotcha.
But it's more like a cloak that you wear, or as an item that you use, and it has a one-time effect in each battle.
Sure.
Palicos are the small, super cute little creatures that kind of follow you around and they help you. Just for people who may or may not know what they are.
For sure. And then you also have a really iconic piece of equipment from Iceborne, which is the clutch claw. So all the hunters in World have this kind of grappling hook attached to their arm. That's sort of improved in functionality when it came to the Iceborne sort of DLC, and they added in something called the clutch claw, which actually allows them to grapple hook onto the monsters, have lots of different effects, ride them into walls, that kind of thing. So we've had a gameplay impact of the clutch claw coming into every single hunter's base deck.
And how's that manifest in gameplay?
So it does a couple of different things. So you can sort of traverse the terrain around the game board. That's kind of more useful for the sort of ranged hunters that want to stay at a bit of a distance. But the iconic use of the clutch claw is to sort of grapple hook into a monster, ride onto it, and then sort of damage its armor. So the main thing you can do,
do you have a way for the miniatures to be on top of monsters?
Not on top of them, but say for example you could grapple hook across, and you would close the distance like that, and then basically what happens is you can impact the monster's armor for the rest of your turn. You draw a damage card, and the amount of damage you draw on the damage card is the amount of armor that's been reduced on the monster. So the better your weapon is over the course of the game, the more impact for the clutch claw is going to be run for you. And it's something that's actually had the clutch claw itself in the video game is quite a controversial piece of equipment. It does quite a lot of different things. It was received in different ways by the video game players. So what we've tried to do is take the sort of the positive intent of what the clutch claw is supposed to do and take that.
What's the negative intent? You're actually being curious of what happened.
Well, I think and correct me if I'm wrong, but the clutch claw didn't exist in Monster Hunter World when that was first released. When Iceborne was released as a video game, they introduced this new mechanic, and then they looked to retrofit it back into Monster Hunter World. Now, the issue is, and it's a similar kind of conversation that we had when we talked about the difference between Monster Hunter World and Monster Hunter Iceborne for the board games, is retrofitting a piece of functionality that has that much of an impact really runs the risk of destabilizing all of your math, how you set that up, the behaviors. They were designed without this functionality in mind, and the challenge, and in the way that it was set up was designed without that in mind. So retrofitting it is just a risky exercise, and I think you find that the core experience that you loved in Monster Hunter World was then different when you went back to it and reapplied the clutch claw into it. And in some people's views, it wasn't great, and in other people's views, they loved it. So it was why it had a kind of mixed response.
That also dovetails quite nicely into the fact that something we haven't sort of drilled into yet specifically, which is Monster Hunter Iceborne for us is a standalone game from World.
Okay.
It's not going to necessarily just be expansions to the existing board game. There is so much content here that we just thought it justify, and the fact that we want to take it in a different direction, it felt like it would justify its own position as a standalone game.
Yep.
And it's for other reasons. I mean, one of the smaller reasons there being the clutch claw wasn't ever designed really with the intent of World in mind. We started working on the board game for Monster Hunter World before Iceborne was even released as a DLC.
Yep.
So we weren't thinking about these kinds of things for Monster Hunter World because Iceborne didn't exist at the time.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
It does also kind of reflect one of the things with Monster Hunter World, which is particularly interesting to share, is the concept of standalone core sets. So in terms of a gateway into this product, you can buy any of the core sets. There's two. currently, and obviously when Iceborne comes out, there will be more core sets that you can buy into. They are standalone, self-contained experiences that will give you 30 to 40 hours of gameplay per campaign you go through. And because of the number of hunters in there, and the number of upgrade paths per hunter, and because of the number of monsters in there, and the amount of different versions of the monster that you can encounter, and the different loot drops they have, you start seeing the variables really sort of starting to stack up in terms of replayability. And then you can then add Elder Dragons and additional challenges. And then for Monster Hunter World, you can buy another core set, plug them together. Now the campaign kind of exponentially grows in complexity and difference. And then you can add additional hunters. As we said, there was 14 in the game overall. Yeah. Each core set comes with 4, and then you can buy the additional 6 as a set.
Let me ask you 2 questions then. So, like in both directions here. So you have these people who are potentially, there's 2 kinds of people here. Well, many kinds of people, but there's 2, I guess, overlapping things here. Where one is somebody just went ahead, they bought all in onto the Monster Hunter World.
Yeah.
What's the main compelling reason as to why they should get Iceborne? Assuming they're not already just like, hey, I want it all. I want all the miniatures. I want all the stuff. I just want it all. But what's the main argument if they're looking to be convinced?
Because if you like that experience, you know you're going to like Iceborne, but Iceborne is going to play and feel differently. Okay. So it's going to feel like a new game, but a game that does what you like.
And that's outside of just purely the monsters being different. Because already you have just different monsters to engage with.
Yeah, and as Jamie was talking about, what we're able to do is take the core Monster Hunter engine, which gives us the ability to look at something like World, like Iceborne, and as we talked about earlier, there's a whole raft of Monster Hunter products out there, and really focus in on a new experience for each and every time we do a Monster Hunter product using this central core engine. And as I say, as Jamie was talking about, in Monster Hunter Iceborne, we're putting more emphasis on how the events work than by comparison we did with Monster Hunter World. It's the same mechanic, but we're using that in different ways to emphasise different parts of the experience to make it feel like a different game.
Another example of what Matt's talking about there is, say, the track tokens that we used in World. Now, what they mainly do in World is they're kind of your randomisation element of how the monster's behaviour deck changes each time you play it. It works in a very different way in Iceborne, which actually doesn't have any impact at all in terms of how the monster's behaviour deck works. That is controlled separately, and we can talk about monsters as their own. That's like its own big topic we can dive into, how they're different on their own. But what the track tokens do now is they do 2 things. So when you flip them over, instead of having numbers on the back, they'll have a number of different icons that you can spend during the hunting phase. Okay. So, for example, you could at the end of the gathering phase, flip them over. You might have one that's like, oh, I can just regenerate 2 health, or I can just draw my hand back up to full during my turn. I can have an extra hunter turn. I can reduce the monster's arm by 1. I can have some extra damage. It can do a number of different things. So it'll be more sort of a differently rewarding experience when you flip those over to go, oh, these are the abilities we have going into this next hunting phase that represent the hunters having learned more about how this monster works in its environment.
They're like cool little situational buffs.
Yes.
But it's down to the player's skill and ability to work out when is a good time to use them and when not. Yeah,
exactly. And then the second thing they'll do is they'll dovetail into what we were talking about before with the event cards, and even some of the sort of the standard time cards in the deck as well, which is some of these time cards have far more impactful and powerful effects, but we thought they need to have some kind of like cost or trigger point to them, so you actually spend track tokens on them to actually have them use the powerful effect. Okay. So if you have the choice there, do I use this for its generic effect that's useful on tabletop, or do I spend some of these instead to make sure this really powerful event card that's come out from a random draw of a card deck is instead useful situationally on the game board for the time we're playing.
Now, so let me ask the question in the reverse order. If somebody who's diving into this world for the first time, they pop into the Iceborne... Actually, before I even ask the reverse order, can someone popping onto the Iceborne campaign buy the original Monster Hunter World content?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's because the Monster Hunter World is coming to retail later this year in about October time, I think it is.
I think that's what currently slated. I mean, subject to votes at the moment.
And so now that we know they can, why should they? Why should they get Monster Hunter World as opposed to Iceborne?
Kind of the same answer, really, which is that it's just a very different experience between the two of them. I mean, there's also the roster of monsters are different. You might see one of the monsters that's in World and not in Iceborne and go, actually, that's my favourite monster to hunt if you're one of the video game fans. But also just for board game experiences, like they are 2 different experiences that you'll play.
The risk of answering that is we live in a world where things can be taken to binary, right?
Yes.
But if you had to be really reductive and take it down to 2 words, I would look at Monster Hunter World and I would think of the word tactical, and for Iceborne I would think of the word cinematic.
Yeah.
That's not to say that Iceborne isn't tactical.
And that Monster Hunter is not cinematic.
Correct, but it's where we're placing the different emphasis to create the different game experiences. And we've spent quite a lot of time and quite a lot of discussion on this very topic to ensure that, for us as gamers, we don't like buying into a game and then a new version comes out and it's kind of just more of the same. And you get to that point, you think, well, I didn't need to buy that.
It's
I like
the
this
weird-
game. I didn't need to buy this game.
Everything's a weird balance. We have this conversation all the time with different things, and like, I mean, you have Call of Duty and Battlefield coming with new versions every single year. You have the iPhone coming with a new version every single year.
Well, it's like FIFA and Madden and things like that, yeah.
And the problem is, I think with the gamers, it's a little different sometimes, because sometimes, like, you know, 5 years go by and a new version comes out, and they're like, but I haven't played my last one. Like, that might be a you problem. And by you, I mean me too here. But it is a different experience.
That's an everyone problem.
Yeah. There is a balance to be struck for sure. And, like, you have different types of systems in terms of whether when the new versus, like, you know, we have Zombicide coming out with new versions every year and a half to 2 years. And so there's a weird balance between wanting it all, when things are new, when things are improvements, when things integrate. Do these two systems integrate? Can you buy a core set of one and expansions from another, or you kind of have to have a core?
So, by design and officially supported by us, no. They are separate, they're separate ranges, they're separate products. But because they are inheriting their core footprint from a central engine, it would be one of those things that would be incredibly easy to house rule and to put together, you know, your own unique campaign where you move from a Monster Hunter World campaign into an Iceborne campaign and then back again. But as I'm sure you're fully aware, for us to try and officially support that and make sure it's balanced and a tight experience all the way through, that becomes an almost impossible task.
Strictly speaking, I go all in on the Iceborne campaign, and then later I see well, not all in all, and I got all the new Iceborne stuff, and then later I see one of the Monster Hunter World expansions at a store somewhere. I can probably plug and play, but not officially supported.
Correct.
That's fair.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Now, to that end, speaking of different lines, I know with Elden Ring you had the whole, you know, new design approach with a lot of pushback with the sculpted bases.
Yes.
Is Iceborne going to have sculpted bases?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, yes, is the answer, but I was quickly working out whether China's going to.
I can blur. If you see a random beep and blur, then at any point during this video, if there's random beeps and blurs, it means things are said that have to be beeped and blurred.
So there's a slightly complicated answer to that, which and the way of explaining that very quickly is that some of our earlier prototypes, when you see some of the 3D prints, we show examples of the game. They may not include the bases that we're talking about, but we are working long term to make sure that the final product has.
But as a company. We look at, you know, our competitors, we look at the products out there, and we look at our expectations of gamers, and there is a distinct shift that if you want to be seen as a premium product from a premium company, base toppers is a really
recently,
you've got to have base toppers in. So we are looking for all of our products going forward to have base toppers, and we don't just want to put the kind of the standard toppers on. Where we can, we really want to start trying to push the envelopes.
I'm going to go a step further actually. There's a particular
monster.
There's a particular monster. This is me doing.
I mean, we are off reservation now.
There's a particular monster I'm super excited to see in the flesh, which is sort of, it's kind of like in terms of like scale of miniature, it's Iceborne's equivalent of Kushala Daora.
Okay.
So it's kind of more tall than it is wide. But we're thinking of one of the key elder dragons for Iceborne is Velkhana. It's one of the sort of the face monsters for the set, and this is a dragon that we've taken some time to make sure is trying to go into sort of mid-flight, mid-leap, and is about to leap off this giant rock. So it's going to have this really kind of cinematic set piece where it's going to be sort of staring down the battlefield.
Cool. I'm looking forward to it. So the bases, like we said, it's about the evolvement of the hobby. But it's one of those things I never cared about particularly. But as you see them more and more, it's hard to not look back and start to feel like a base that never bothered you is starting to look a little plain.
Yeah, sure. There's actually a slightly nerdy aspect to that for me as well, which is if you can put more volume into the base of the mini, it changes the center of gravity, but it means that you can engineer the miniature in a more. It gives you more options when you come to engineering the mini. So
very interesting, very cool. And how many monsters are there in Monster Hunter World so far? 14 something? No, there's 14 hunters.
It's 4-8 battle dragons. I think it's like 14. I think it is 14. I think it's the same number.
Okay, so around 14, and so and feel free to say no comment on this, but roughly, is it roughly the same number in Iceborne? Say rough. Oh, it's more. Okay, cool, better, cool.
Yeah.
How do you? So I've only played. I think I've only played against 2, maybe 3 different monsters in Monster Hunter World so far, and so far they've felt different. But that's an easy conversation when you have 2 or 3. How is that process of a monster feeling different? Like, again, we talk about different mechanics, sure, but like as a consumer, great, I'm diving into it because I love it, or I just want the collecting aspect, sure. But if I'm more mechanically driven, how different is the scope of monsters across Monster Hunter World, across Iceborne? How different are you able to keep that up?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So one of the things that we've allowed ourselves to do is a little bit more creative freedom when it comes to the monsters in Iceborne, because like he's talking about, it's a big array of monsters. We need to make sure that each one of them feels different.
Okay.
So what we've done is allowed ourselves a little bit more, say, budget in the spec for the sets that we're making to allow us to do things like, if this monster is able to show what it does on the game board a little bit more clearly by adding a couple of specific tokens in for that one to do what it needs to do, to have a physical representation of what it's doing and its playstyle, we've allowed ourselves to do that. So there's a little bit more creative freedom in terms of what we can do to show off exactly exactly how these monsters are supposed to play, supposed to feel. And also in just the design of different kinds of special rules, we brought in how, sort of, like we talked about the clutch claw, how that works. There are different elements for us to play with to give you a different experience, and also a little bit more sort of wider design space just in how we've done that to be able to account for this.
But it's also, it comes down to, and we talk about this quite often internally, is the theory of kind of gameplay, which is if you take like a miniature and you define what its strength is, that's one end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
If you and the rest, and this is in the middle, and then you give it a weakness, and that's there. And the natural inclination is when you play test, you go, oh my god, that's too strong. Knock that back a bit. Oh, that's too weak. Knock it back a bit. And then what you quickly realise is across a range of miniatures, everything is gravitating towards the middle, and you end up with everything feeling quite mushy and similar. So what we look to do is maintain that delta between like the maximum strength and the maximum weakness, and for us, that defines the amount of gameplay. Now,
one of the reasons I personally love games like Kemet and Blood Rage is because that's broken. Yes, it's broken, but everything's broken, so who cares?
We call it imperfect balance. So if everything's broken, it's balanced, but everything feels imbalanced individually, and that's what makes it easier in a way for us to ensure that each of these monsters will feel different, because each will have a distinct spike of different of strength or strengths and weakness and weaknesses. And part of the fun of the gameplay is to weaken their strength and strengthen against their weakness.
And the same is true for the hunters. The hunters have, like, we're quite pleased with the fact that we've got, even in World, and the same is going to be true in Iceborne, we've got 14 very different playstyles there for each of the hunters. They all have the identity of what they're supposed to. From a lot of the feedback we're getting early from backers and from early influencers like yourself, when they've commented on it, is that they do feel like the hunter you're playing in the video game. Like, someone goes, I've played the Switch Axe quite a lot, this feels like playing a Switch Axe hunter, etc. It's quite good feedback for us. But at the same time, that sort of strength and weakness delta that Matt's talking about is also apparent in the hunters. And then that sort of in the middle of that delta between strengths and weaknesses, you have gameplay.
I think there's a myriad of factors, and I feel like I'm talking to the right audience, looking around this room full of amazing games. But never underestimate the strength of collection or shopping or acquisition. So when you're going through your campaign, you are as a group are making choices about the monsters you want to fight, because you don't necessarily just want a cool experience. There's a specific piece of loot that you're looking to drop. That's actually quite a compulsive loop and feels fun when you engage with it as players. So that really helps kind of emphasise the difference of each of the fights as well. Because, all right, you might fight this guy. Did you get the drop you wanted? No. Okay, let's fight a slightly harder version of them. Let's see what the difference between that version and the previous version was. Did we get the loot drop? It kind of all feeds into emphasising that each battle feels different.
Now, the Clutch Claw is... Speaking of the whole delta, strengths, weaknesses, all that, the Clutch Claw represents another strength for hunters, I assume.
Yes.
Now, is that something that's an added strength, or does it come at the cost of something else, something gets traded in?
Yeah, so it comes with a cost.
No, you go for it.
Shall I go?
You go. I'll probably got a point to add on to yours.
All right, sweet. So
somewhere along the line, if you made something more powerful, you either have to take away something powerful, or you have to add something worse.
So huge amount of levers we can pull to kind of do that. What we've looked to do for Iceborne is look at the way that you manage your hand. So the Clutch Claw is a card that you play from your deck, and if it is a single card in amongst your deck, or at the moment it's a single card, you're not going to get to use it all the time. So suddenly choosing when to use it becomes a strategic or tactical decision. That's fun and interesting. But then we're looking at how you're able to manipulate your deck. So there's a little bit more tutoring, a little bit more recursion that you can actually do with your deck. So hand management is more emphasised in Iceborne. So there's a game within a game, which is when to use the Clutch Claw, and then how can I get it back, and when do I need it back. I'll let Jamie do the next bit, which I think I know what it is. I might write it down.
Possibly, which is because it's not something we've talked about yet, which is great. So it's the advent of wind-up attacks for the monsters.
Okay.
So we're in Monster Hunter World.
No, that's not where I thought you were going.
No,
that's cool. I thought you were going to talk about the fact that Clutch Claw improves as you improve.
That's also true.
Yeah. Okay. So all right. Cool. This is new though.
So,
all right.
Yeah. No, it is. It is. So if you picture a monster behavior as it is now, you read it from left to right. So you've got might be one to show up on screen if you have one, and then it's you have like your targeting, you have then a move and attack, or attack and the move, and then the hunter turns. With wind-up attacks, we have the monsters making incredibly powerful attacks that will probably were designed to one-shot hunters that they actually connect with. But they're meant to be like, in a video game you have this kind of, the floor is glowing blue, something's going to hit there, and then it does after a few seconds later. We want to represent that in the board game. So the monsters
it's quite rare to see that in board games as well. It's hard to do, isn't it? Telegraphing something's going to happen.
For sure. So we want to have these telegraphed attacks that if they hit you, they will just take you out. But the advent of the other part of that is that the hunters get like a small amount of opportunity to either delay, deny, do some crowd control on that. So they have on these behavior cards.
Get the heck out of the way.
Exactly, or just leave. So they have a small window where they can actually have 1 or 2 hunters attacking beforehand, and they'll have some hunters attacking afterwards as well. So this behaviour comes out. Some hunters go first to try to go, oh, this attack is coming, we need to just get out of dodge, or try and stun the monster or something to deal with it. If they don't manage to deal with it, it's going to take someone out, which means the monsters themselves are far more threatening. They don't give you as much sort of breathing space and room to deal with these kinds of attacks. It's like, this behaviour is here, you had no warning, you have to deal with it now, or something bad's going to happen.
Interesting. So, like, to a certain extent, like, the 2 game systems I can think of that kind of somewhat mimic that in different ways. One is literally does it. There was a game that it was on Kickstarter. It didn't even, I think they're relaunching it or something, but it was a game all about climbing. You're climbing these giant beasts and titans.
Sure.
And I can't remember what the name was called, but it was meant to be kind of reminiscent of the
Attack on Titan?
Or Shadow of Colossus.
Shadow of Colossus, yeah. It's meant to be reminiscent of that. And they have these cards where the monster would, like, hit certain areas based on where these tokens were, and so you have to decide, okay, well, I either stick where I am and I take a big chunk of damage, or my whole plans have to change, so I have to navigate around where the hit's going to be.
Sure.
And I like that mechanic in general. It just gives you another battlefield consideration, although if you're straight up being one-shotted, the battlefield consideration is move, nothing else. And then the other one is Primal, which is not delivered as well. Primal had degrees of, I don't know exactly how to implement it, it's been a while since I played it, but they also had these degrees of where you want to hit things, of where you can't hit things to a certain degree. Like, if you hit this in an area of the monster, then something's going to trigger that round.
Yeah.
So you're trying to dance around how they engage with you. And I like those mechanics in general. It just gives you another consideration, another thing to be mindful of.
It's the same. I think Oathsworn does it in a pretty neat way as well, where it shows you the ability that's going to come next.
Yes.
And so you can kind of at least have that in your mind's eye when you're planning your move.
I haven't played a ton of Oathsworn yet, but from when I have played, you usually don't avoid them. You just know the bad thing that's happening.
Well, yeah, pretty much.
You're like, okay, I'm going to get eaten by the broodmother in 2 turns. It is what it is, but I'm just going to get eaten. Yeah.
I don't need a card to tell me that.
Yeah, and there's, I haven't played a ton of those, so I need to keep going through it. But like, I do like the idea. It still gives you that tactical planning. How do I minimize the damage? How do I take as little things as possible? What can I possibly do to avoid or evade?
Yeah.
So, but coming back to the original question as well, what builds upon what makes the monsters more threatening, more dangerous? We've got wind-up attacks as one part of that. Then we also have the possibility of, which we haven't talked about yet, is monster turf wars or invasions. So you've got the capacity for not only you're fighting monster 1. This is the quest monster, and then I know this is not canonical at all, but say monster 2 is going to invade, and then just halfway through the quest, another monster turns up, and now they're fighting each other and you. Okay. And you have to decide whether you're going to proceed there. Whether you're going to try and chase off the invading monster or ignore it and continue the quest monster.
And how does that manifest in terms of the monster AI?
So I mean.
Go for it. Yeah. So this is a long and enjoyable conversation.
It is. Yeah. This could be quite a deep topic. But so the monsters that invade one are generally canonical from the video game. Not all monsters will invade other monster fights. When they do, they have their own bespoke set of invasion behaviors. So this is like it's to do with management of the monster, because there's already quite a lot of sort of tokens and cards to deal with a single monster in the first place. You want the second monster to be easier to manage, and then so it's a shortened set of behaviors. It also means it's like their greatest hits of like classic moves that you would see from video games, and also it means that they are specifically designed through a combination of attacking each other as monsters but not getting locked in against each other. They'll actually move away and attack the hunters as well, and give you a lot of different things to deal with.
Yeah, when we first tested the system, we used the standard AI, and it found, it didn't happen often, but it happened often enough that you could kind of see the monsters getting like locked into a state that felt unnatural and didn't seem sensible. They were kind of butting heads and not really doing anything and ignoring like the hunters around them. And so we looked at, as Jamie says, a more streamlined but more importantly a bespoke set of behaviours that meant that the invading monster had a behaviour that created the situations where you still got that cinematic experience of the 2 monsters fighting, but if you as a hunter stray too close, you're going to get embroiled in the fight. Now, the minute we kind of realised that, then we wanted to start add reasons for you to want to move closely and go into the danger zone rather than sitting back and letting the monster do the work for you. So it does give you a limited time window opportunity for additional loot, additional things that you can kind of acquire during that fight while the turf war is going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And then in terms of how the turn actually works there as well, it slots very nicely into the turn order. Once you've got 2 monsters on the game board, it's the invasion monster goes first. It doesn't have any hunter turns attached to it. It just goes into the quest monster's activation, and then once that's done, you have your hunter turns as normal. Repeat, rinse, repeat.
So going back to plug and play and balance and all that, so the things you have to be mindful of with different systems is if you're using an Iceborne monster, an Iceborne hunter against a regular monster, they might be a bit stronger. And the reverse is true if you don't. Like if you're trying to plug and play certain aspects of that. Gotcha. So we have the Clutch Claw, we have cinematic elements, we have these invading monsters. Anything else as far as, again, aside from differences in just hunters and monsters, anything else that's notably different?
So we've got the monster decks are different, aren't they?
Yes, yes, indeed. So one of the things that we wanted to do a little bit differently with the Iceborne monsters is have a little bit more sort of flexibility and replayability when it comes to how the behaviours come out. So in World, what you have is a 10-card deck of behaviours. 1 card is then shuffled in from the end of the gathering phase, which gives you like a 13 cards to play with overall. We still have those same 13 cards in Iceborne, but they're sort of distributed differently. So you have about 7 cards that are their standard behaviour deck. You'll have 5 of those that come out in the first place, which means just naturally every time you play the monster, shuffle the deck, you'll have a different set of 5 behaviours. That's kind of just taking care of itself. We don't need the track tokens to do that, which frees up the track tokens to go and do something else as well, which we talked about earlier. On top of that, once you have been through those 5 behaviours once on the battlefield, or if the monster's been reduced to half health, you take that behaviour deck away and you take out its enrage behaviour deck, which is its other set of behaviours, which means the monster will act differently, it will hit more powerfully, it will just sort of escalate the situation and escalate the fight. And you add that into potentially a turf war monster coming in, and you've got things that are changing and adapting all over the place with the battlefield.
Gotcha. And so, like you said, you shuffle in 5 monster behaviors. Is that from each monster has their own behavior deck, or is this from a general deck?
Each monster has their own behavior deck, just the same as they did in World.
So, like, how many? So you have the behavior deck of cards. And you take these 5 cards, and then when it goes through all 5, you go to the next level, or when you get to half health. Okay,
correct.
Gotcha.
Correct, yeah.
Cool. Okay. Anything else we need to know about?
I think
that's pretty much it. I think the tracking phase is as we talked about is slightly different with more emphasis on the actions that you take during the tracking phase manifesting themselves in the game, and we do that through the event cards and through the tracking tokens that you have there. If you're playing in the campaign mode version, as Jamie alluded to earlier, those events can not only create chain effects within that hunt, but they can then also create residual effects that then last into subsequent hunts. So it may well be, I don't know, you might find, I'm going to make this up, a crazy guy in the jungle in a watchtower with a big long telescope, right? Sure. And you're like, well, what the heck's that about? But anyway, you put this event card into the deck, and then 2 or 3 or 4 hunts later, that card comes through, and suddenly it creates this chain where he's actually a lookout, and he's seen like a monster in the distance, and he gives you a shout of warning, and suddenly you get this benefit from it. But then he comes under attack, and you can see how it kind of cascades through the entirety of the campaign. So it will create much stronger narrative threads through the whole campaign. It's
almost like Gloomhaven Road events where you slowly put things in play, and they show up and slowly change.
Yeah, and similar mechanic in Oathsworn as well. And when they happen, players who are paying attention, which is pretty much all of us generally, you remember, I remember where that came from, and I remember the story that happened there, and now this is the story now. And what I find that deeply fascinating from a design perspective is that's now a unique instance of that story. We've provided the modular parts for you to create your own story at your tabletop, and you getting that card in the circumstances that you got it will be different from the circumstances I got it. I will have a different story and a different interpretation of it from the same mechanic. I find that endlessly fascinating because it means that each of our stories is personal and unique to us. It's really delivering into our player agency driven approach to this, and these are the kind of things that you tend to remember more strongly when you're talking about games afterwards with your friends, or you're reminiscing on a good time.
Yeah. Very cool. All right, so I'll have links down below. In May 18th, you said May 18th, right?
Yes, May 18th.
May 18th, over on Kickstarter. We're going to have Iceborne. We'll have more content, more things. Are there going to be playthroughs of Iceborne?
We've got a press event coming up.
Okay.
There's, we'd be crazy not to have a playable version at that point, wouldn't we?
Sometimes, you know what? Honestly, with these games, sometimes you never, the delays, the scheduling, especially when you're working with an IP, any number of things can happen.
There's an awful lot of hurdles that pop up randomly and repeatedly. So, but yes, all things being equal, there's absolutely going to be something we'll get to.
No, I remember Elder Scrolls, which is Elder Scrolls currently the Chip Theory games. Like that, I know they had plans to have like a ton of copies available at some point, and things got delayed enough that they're like, okay, we now have 2 copies, and we're gonna have. They had press events as well, but that was like a last minute adjustment because they couldn't get copies out.
Just gonna get it. Yeah.
Things happen.
Nice.
Yeah, things happen.
It happens.
With our other campaigns, especially doing COVID, there were a lot of campaigns that things just didn't happen.
Well, I think COVID introduced a whole new set of hurdles, which was, is the factory even open?
Yes.
Your manufacturing partners, are they actually available to print off your demo copies? Let alone, are your IP partners in the office and able to sign off on things? And you absolutely can't go ahead without having green lights across the board. So, yeah, it happens, but we're quite lucky, with the partners that we get to work with. We have real strong long-term relationships with them. Capcom we've obviously worked with for many years now. It makes it easier. The longer we work with them, the more trust they have in the care and attention we take with their IP, and that reciprocates in it's easier for us to get stuff signed off. So.
Perfect. All right. Well, I appreciate the conversation. I appreciate the talk. We'll have links down below to more things. Monster Hunter World, Iceborne. It's coming to Kickstarter. It'll be more content. Decide responsibly and all that stuff about what you want, don't want. It'll be a lot of fun things. But also, you probably, as much as you might want it, you probably don't need everything. But that's a decision you can make on your own. In any case, until next time, Jeff and Jamie, appreciate having you here.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Thank you.